I'm Elena Taylor, 47 years old, and I discovered that the woman who built my career spent 3 years systematically destroying it from the inside. But what she did when I finally caught her was even worse. If you've ever trusted someone who turned out to be sabotaging your success behind your back, please let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional betrayal. 23 years ago, I walked into the gleaming marble lobby of Meridian Biotech for my first day as a junior research coordinator, clutching a leather portfolio my mother had given me and wearing a suit that had cost me 2 weeks' salary. The building smelled like expensive cleaning products and possibility. Dr. Patricia Kellerman was waiting for me by the security desk, her silver hair pulled back in that signature low chignon, wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She extended her hand with a grip that was firm but not crushing and said, "Elena, welcome to where careers are built." I believed her completely. Patricia had recruited me herself after a conference presentation I'd given on protein synthesis pathways. I was a nobody from a state school, but she saw something in my research that others had missed. During my interview, she'd leaned back in her corner office chair, surrounded by awards and photos of her shaking hands with Nobel laureates, and told me, "I don't hire people to stay in their lane. I hire people to redefine what lanes are possible." The offer she made was 30% higher than anything else I'd received, with a direct reporting line to her and access to research budgets that most senior scientists only dreamed about. My first project under Patricia's mentorship was analyzing the efficacy of a new Alzheimer's treatment protocol. She gave me access to patient data that would typically take years to earn, taught me how to navigate the labyrinth of FDA documentation, and introduced me to every major player in neurodegenerative research. When I presented our preliminary findings at the American Neurological Association conference, Patricia sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly as I fielded questions from researchers whose papers I'd studied in graduate school. Afterward, she took me to dinner at a restaurant where the wine list was thicker than most research journals and told me, "This is just the beginning, Elena. You have the kind of mind that changes everything." She wasn't wrong about the career building. Under Patricia's guidance, I published 17 peer-reviewed papers in my first 5 years, 3 of them as first author. She connected me with grant committees, recommended me for speaking engagements, and made sure my name was attached to every major breakthrough our lab produced. When Meridian launched their precision medicine initiative, Patricia insisted I lead the genetic screening protocol development. The work required 18-hour days for 6 months, but the result was a screening system that increased early detection rates by 43%. And the DA fast-tracked our approval, and suddenly I was being quoted in medical journals and invited to policy roundtables. By my 7th year, I'd earned my own corner office 2 floors below Patricia's, with windows that looked out over the Charles River and a team of 8 researchers reporting to me. The office had that new leather smell of success, and I decorated it with the awards I'd accumulated. The Rising Star Award from the Biomedical Research Foundation, the Innovation Excellence Recognition from the National Institute of Health, and a framed photo of me presenting our breakthrough early detection protocol to the Senate Health Committee. Patricia would often stop by during her evening walks through the building, settling into the chair across from my desk to discuss not just research but career strategy. "You're building something sustainable here," she'd say, gesturing at the organized chaos of my research materials. "But don't get comfortable. Comfortable researchers become irrelevant researchers." The golden period lasted from year 8 through year 14. I was promoted to Senior Research Director, then to Vice President of Translational Research. My team grew to 23 people across 3 departments, and our research budget exceeded $12 million annually. We were developing not just treatments but diagnostic tools that could predict Alzheimer's onset 15 years before symptoms appeared. The work was revolutionary, and I was being headhunted by companies across the industry. But every time a recruiter called, Patricia would remind me of everything Meridian had invested in my success. "Loyalty is a rare commodity in biotech," she'd say during our monthly mentorship dinners. "The researchers who jump ship for every opportunity never build anything lasting." She was right about loyalty being rare, though not in the way I'd thought. The first crack in my trust came during year 15, when I noticed that some of my team's breakthrough research was being presented at conferences by researchers I'd never worked with. When I asked Patricia about it, she explained that Meridian was beginning to syndicate successful methodologies across partner institutions. It seemed logical, even flattering, that our work was being so widely adopted. The second crack was smaller: emails that seemed to disappear from my inbox, meetings I wasn't invited to that directly involved my research areas, and junior researchers who would quickly change the subject when I walked into their conversations. But Patricia's explanations were always reasonable: restructuring communications to reduce email overload, streamlining decision-making to increase efficiency, and encouraging independent thinking among junior staff. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in October. I arrived at the office at 6:30, 30 minutes before my usual time, because I wanted to review the presentation materials one final time before the board meeting. The presentation was my baby, 18 months of work distilled into 43 slides that would determine whether Meridian approved the largest research budget in the company's history. Our early-onset Alzheimer's prevention protocol had shown remarkable results in clinical trials, and the board was deciding whether to fast-track it toward FDA approval. This wasn't just another quarterly review, this was the presentation that would define the next 5 years of my career and potentially save thousands of lives. The hallways were empty except for the cleaning crew, their vacuum cleaners humming against the industrial carpet that always smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. I badged into my office and immediately noticed something wrong. My computer was still logged in, which was impossible since I always locked it before leaving. The screen showed my email inbox, but the folder structure looked different. Files I'd organized meticulously were in wrong locations, and my presentation folder had been accessed at 11:15 the previous night, 4 hours after I'd left the building. I opened the presentation file and felt my stomach drop. The slides were still there, but they'd been altered. Subtle changes that would be invisible to someone who hadn't memorized every chart and graph, but devastating to someone who had. Statistical confidence intervals had been adjusted by fractions of percentage points that would make our results appear less significant. Timeline projections had been extended by months, making our research appear behind schedule. Most damaging of all, the patient outcome predictions, the heart of our entire protocol, had been modified to suggest a much lower success rate than our actual data supported. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the document properties. The last modification timestamp read 11:18 p.m. and the user ID was P. Kellerman. Patricia, the woman who had built my career, had spent Monday night systematically sabotaging the most important presentation of my life. I sat in my chair, staring at the screen and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Patricia had access to all my files as my mentor and the company's chief research officer, but why would she sabotage work that reflected well on both of us? The early onset prevention protocol would be the crown jewel of both our careers, unless she planned to present it as her own work. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I pulled up the board meeting agenda and saw that the presentation order had been changed. Instead of me presenting the prevention protocol as scheduled, Patricia was now listed as the primary presenter, with me providing technical support and data clarification. The email notification of this change had been sent at 11:23 p.m., 5 minutes after she'd finished altering my presentation. 21 years of mentorship, collaboration, and what I'd believed was genuine friendship crystallized into a single, devastating truth: Patricia Kellerman had been systematically positioning herself to take credit for my life's work, and today was the day she planned to complete the theft. But I had backup plans. I always had backup plans. The security badge swipes were logged, so there would be a record of Patricia accessing the building at 11 p.m. when she should have been at home. The original presentation files were automatically backed up to our secure cloud server every hour, creating timestamps she couldn't alter. Most importantly, I'd learned early in my career to keep detailed documentation of my research process, including voice memos, handwritten notes, and email trails that would prove the development timeline and my role in every breakthrough. I spent the next hour methodically gathering evidence: screenshots of the altered presentation with timestamps, copies of the original files from 3 different backup sources, and email threads that clearly showed my leadership of the research team. I also pulled my research notebooks from the past 18 months, physical documents with dated, handwritten notes that would be impossible to falsify. By 7:30, I had assembled a portfolio of evidence that would be difficult to dispute. The question was what to do with it. Confronting Patricia directly would give her time to develop a defense or find a way to discredit my evidence. Going to HR would put me at the mercy of a department that had historically protected senior executives over individual contributors. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., giving me less than 3 hours to decide how to handle the most significant betrayal of my professional life. As I sat in my office, watching the sunrise paint the Charles River gold through my windows, I realized that this moment would define not just my career but my integrity. I could stay silent, let Patricia present my work as her own, and hope that my ongoing contributions would eventually be recognized. Or I could fight back, knowing that challenging a woman who controlled my career trajectory could destroy everything I'd built at Meridian. I chose to fight, but I was going to be strategic about it. The first escalation came during the pre-board meeting that Patricia had called for 8:30. She'd gathered the senior research team in Conference Room A, a glass-walled space that overlooked the main lobby and made every conversation visible to the entire company. Patricia stood at the head of the polished maple table, wearing a charcoal suit that commanded attention, and began reviewing the presentation agenda. When she reached the prevention protocol section, she looked directly at me and said, "Elena, I've made some adjustments to strengthen the statistical presentation. I think you'll find the modifications make our results more conservative and defensible." I kept my voice level. "I'd like to review those modifications before the board presentation. The original data was thoroughly validated." Patricia's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her eyes. "Of course, though I should mention that I've been working on this protocol independently for some time. The board will be interested to know that this represents a synthesis of multiple research approaches." The other team members, Dr. James Chen, Dr. Sarah Williams, and Dr. Michael Rodriguez, exchanged glances that told me this conversation was going exactly as Patricia had planned. She was establishing her narrative in front of witnesses, positioning my 18 months of leadership as merely one contribution to her broader vision. "Patricia," I said carefully, "the board meeting agenda has me listed as the primary presenter for this research. When did that change?" "Elena, I think there may be some confusion about roles and responsibilities. As Chief Research Officer, I naturally take the lead on presentations of this magnitude. You'll have plenty of opportunities to discuss the technical details during the Q&A session." Dr. Chen, who'd worked closely with me on the statistical modeling, looked uncomfortable. "Elena's been leading this research from the beginning." It seems like Patricia cut him off smoothly. "James, I appreciate your support for Elena's contributions. However, leadership decisions need to consider the full scope of strategic implications. Elena's done excellent work executing the research plan that we developed together." That was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. The research plan had been my design from the first hypothesis through the final clinical trial protocol. But Patricia was rewriting history in real time, and doing it with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the power. I realized then that this wasn't just about one presentation. Patricia had been systematically positioning herself to take credit for my work while simultaneously undermining my credibility with the research team. The modifications to my presentation weren't just about today's board meeting, they were about establishing a pattern of my work being corrected and improved by her oversight. "I'd like to see the modified presentation before the board meeting," I said again. Patricia checked her watch, a gesture that suggested my request was both unnecessary and time-consuming. "Elena, I think you're overthinking this. The modifications are minimal, and I'm confident you'll be able to support the presentation effectively. Unless you have concerns about your familiarity with your own research." It was a masterful manipulation. In front of the senior research team, she'd positioned any further questions from me as evidence that I wasn't familiar enough with my own research to present it confidently. If I continued to push, I'd look uncertain and unprepared. If I backed down, I'd be accepting her authority to modify my work without my input. I chose a third option. "I'm completely confident in the research. I'll see you in the boardroom at 10. The second escalation began that afternoon when I discovered that my access to the research database had been restricted. I was attempting to pull additional data to support my documentation when the system returned an error message. "User access limited by administrative override. Contact system administrator for assistance." I walked down the hall to IT support where Marcus Webb looked genuinely confused when I explained the problem. That's weird, Elena. Your access level should be unrestricted for all research databases. Let me check the changelog. He typed rapidly, his brow furrowing as he reviewed the screen. Okay, this is definitely not right. Your access was downgraded this morning at 9:15 by P. Kellerman. The reason listed is security review pending completion of departmental restructuring. What departmental restructuring? Marcus shrugged. News to me, but I can't override a CRO directive without going through proper channels. You'll need to get authorization from Dr. Kellerman or submit a formal access request through HR. I thanked Marcus and walked back to my office, my mind racing. Patricia had systematically locked me out of the data I needed to prove my ownership of the research, and she'd done it immediately after the morning meeting where I'd questioned her presentation modifications. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. The third escalation came via email 2 hours later. The subject line read "Research Team Restructuring Effective Immediately," and the sender was Patricia's assistant, copied to the entire senior research staff. The message was corporate speak perfection. Following strategic review of departmental efficiency and project management optimization, the following team structure changes will be implemented effective immediately. Dr. Elena Taylor will be transitioning from project lead to technical consultant for the early onset prevention protocol. Dr. Patricia Kellerman will assume primary oversight for all aspects of this research, including board presentations, budget management, and external communications. I read the email 3 times, each reading making the reality clearer. Patricia wasn't just stealing my presentation, she was officially removing me from leadership of my own research. The technical consultant role would make me a supporting player in work I'd conceived, designed, and executed. Worse, it established a paper trail that would make her future claim to the research seem legitimate. The email continued, "This restructuring reflects Meridian's commitment to ensuring our most high-impact research receives appropriate senior oversight. Dr. Taylor's technical expertise will continue to be invaluable in supporting Dr. Kellerman's strategic vision for advancing this groundbreaking protocol." I felt nauseous reading those words. Supporting Dr. Kellerman's strategic vision for research that had been entirely my vision from day one. Patricia was rewriting our history in corporate language that would be nearly impossible to challenge without seeming petty or insubordinate. My phone rang. Dr. Chen's voice was carefully controlled. "Elena, did you see the restructuring email?" "I saw it. This doesn't make sense. You've been leading this research for 18 months. The prevention protocol was your idea, your design, your clinical trial structure. Patricia barely knew the details until last month. James, be careful what you say on recorded phone lines." There was a pause. "Elena, are you suggesting that?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that we should all be thoughtful about how we discuss leadership transitions." Another pause, longer this time. "Jesus, Elena, she's really doing this, isn't she?" "I have to go, James. I'll talk to you later." I hung up and stared at my computer screen, where the restructuring email still glowed with its careful corporate language. Patricia had spent 21 years building my trust, teaching me to rely on her guidance and positioning herself as my greatest advocate. Now she was using that trust against me, systematically dismantling my professional authority while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. But she'd made one crucial mistake. In her haste to establish control over my research, she'd moved too quickly and too obviously. The timeline of events, the presentation modifications, the access restrictions, the restructuring announcement, was suspicious enough to raise questions among people who knew the real history of the project. The fourth escalation arrived the next morning in the form of a meeting request from HR. The subject line read "Performance Discussion Confidential," and the time slot was for 2 hours in the middle of the day when most of the research staff would be in their weekly department meetings. The location was Conference Room D, a windowless space in the basement that was typically used for disciplinary actions and termination meetings. I arrived 5 minutes early and found Patricia already seated at the conference table, next to Jennifer Walsh from HR and David Kumar, the head of legal. The setup told me everything I needed to know about the meeting's purpose. This wasn't a performance discussion, it was the beginning of my termination process. Jennifer opened with standard HR language about ensuring workplace harmony and addressing concerns that had been raised about team dynamics and communication effectiveness. David took notes on a legal pad, his expression carefully neutral. Patricia wore a expression of concerned professionalism, like a doctor delivering disappointing test results to a patient she genuinely cared about. Jennifer continued, "We've received feedback suggesting that the recent research team restructuring has created some tension and confusion about roles and responsibilities. Dr. Kellerman has expressed concern that you may be struggling with the transition from project leadership to a consulting role." "I wasn't aware there were performance concerns," I replied carefully. "Could you be more specific about the feedback you've received?" Jennifer consulted her notes. "There are reports of resistance to management directives, questioning of strategic decisions in front of team members, and concerns about your comfort level with the new team structure." Each item on her list corresponded to my attempts to document and challenge Patricia's theft of my research. My request to review the presentation modifications had become questioning strategic decisions. My confusion about the access restrictions had become resistance to management directives. My obvious displeasure with being demoted had become evidence that I wasn't handling the transition professionally. Patricia leaned forward with an expression of concerned mentorship. "Elena, I want you to know that this conversation is happening because I care about your long-term success at Meridian. The early onset prevention protocol represents exactly the kind of high-impact research that can define a career. But projects of this magnitude require a level of strategic oversight that goes beyond technical expertise. Patricia, I developed this research from the initial hypothesis through the completed clinical trials. I'm intimately familiar with every aspect of the strategic considerations." David Kumar looked up from his legal pad. "Dr. Taylor, are you suggesting that the current team structure doesn't reflect appropriate strategic oversight?" It was a trap. If I agreed, I'd be criticizing Patricia's leadership and undermining the restructuring decision. If I disagreed, I'd be admitting that the demotion was appropriate. Either way, they'd have documentation of my difficult attitude toward the new arrangements. "I'm suggesting that effective strategic oversight requires understanding the research development process," I said carefully. "The most strategic decisions we make are based on technical considerations that require deep familiarity with the data." Jennifer made a note. "Elena, part of professional growth involves learning to trust organizational decisions even when we might have handled things differently. Dr. Kellerman has decades of experience in strategic research management." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with each of my responses being carefully documented and subtly reframed as evidence of my inability to accept the new team structure. By the end of the meeting, they'd established a paper trail showing that I was resistant to change, questioning of authority, and potentially disruptive to team dynamics. As we were concluding, Patricia delivered the final blow with perfect timing and tone. "Elena, I want you to know that I still believe in your potential. This transition period is an opportunity to develop new skills and perspectives that will serve you well throughout your career. I hope you'll consider this a chance to grow rather than a setback." The paternalistic language was designed to position her as the supportive mentor trying to help a struggling mentee. Anyone reading the meeting notes would see Patricia as patient and encouraging, while I would appear defensive and unable to accept constructive feedback. Walking back to my office after that meeting, I realized that Patricia had orchestrated the entire situation with remarkable sophistication. She'd stolen my research, demoted me from my own project, and now was building a case for my termination, all while maintaining the appearance of being my concerned mentor. Every move I made to defend myself was being used as evidence of my unprofessionalism and inability to work collaboratively. But I'd been taking notes too, and I'd been recording our conversations on my phone. The climax confrontation came exactly 1 week later, in the same conference room A, where Patricia had first announced her modifications to my presentation. This time the attendees included the full research review board: Patricia, Jennifer Walsh from HR, David Kumar from legal, Dr. Amanda Foster, Meridian's CEO, Dr. Robert Chen, head of clinical development, and Dr. Michael Torres, chief scientific officer. I'd been told this was a project review meeting, but the presence of legal and HR made its real purpose clear. Patricia had prepared meticulously. She'd printed bound copies of a presentation titled Early Onset Alzheimer's Prevention Protocol, Strategic Development and Implementation Timeline. The cover page listed her as primary investigator, with my name appearing third in a list of contributing researchers. Inside, the research timeline had been carefully reconstructed to position her as the strategic visionary who had guided my technical implementation of her broader conceptual framework. Dr. Foster opened the meeting with standard corporate language about reviewing high-impact research projects and ensuring proper documentation of development processes. We want to make sure that our most promising research has appropriate attribution and strategic oversight as we move toward FDA submission. Patricia's presentation was masterful. She'd taken 18 months of my research and reframed it as the execution of her strategic vision. The initial hypothesis that I developed during my Saturday morning brainstorming sessions became her conceptual framework for early intervention protocols. And the clinical trial design that I'd spent 3 months developing became her strategic approach to FDA-compliant testing methodology. Even the patient recruitment criteria that I'd refined through countless conversations with neurologists became her innovative approach to participant selection optimization. She spoke for 45 minutes using my research to demonstrate her leadership capability and strategic thinking. Every breakthrough I'd achieved became evidence of her effective mentorship and oversight. Every challenge I'd overcome became proof of her ability to guide complex research through difficult development phases. When she finished, Dr. Foster turned to me. "Elena, Dr. Kellerman has presented an impressive overview of this research development. Do you have any comments or clarifications you'd like to add?" This was my moment. I'd spent the week preparing my response, organizing evidence, and deciding exactly how to present the truth. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Before I respond, I want to make sure everyone understands that this conversation is being recorded for accuracy. I've been documenting this situation for the past 2 weeks, and I think the board deserves to hear the complete timeline of this research development. Jennifer Walsh immediately objected. "Elena, recording meetings without consent violates our corporate communication policies." "Actually," I replied, "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, which means I'm legally entitled to record any conversation I'm a part of. And given the serious allegations being made about research attribution, I think accurate documentation serves everyone's interests." David Kumar looked uncomfortable but nodded. "The recording is legal, though we should note its presence in the meeting minutes." I opened my laptop and pulled up the first piece of evidence, an email I'd sent to Patricia 18 months earlier, with a timestamp showing it was sent at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. The subject line read, "Novel Approach to Early Onset Prevention," and the message contained a detailed outline of the research hypothesis that became our prevention protocol. This email shows the original conception of the research that Dr. Kellerman just presented as her strategic framework. As you can see, it was my idea, developed during my own time and sent to Patricia for her feedback and guidance on how to proceed with institutional support. I clicked to the next document, my handwritten research notebook from that same weekend, photographed and time-stamped to show the development of the clinical trial methodology. These are my original notes developing the testing protocol that Patricia just described as her strategic approach to FDA-compliant methodology. The handwriting analysis and paper documentation make the timeline irrefutable. Patricia's composure was beginning to crack. "Elena, I think you're misunderstanding the collaborative nature of research development. Individual contributions are always synthesized into broader strategic frameworks." "Let me show you what collaboration actually looks like," I replied, pulling up a series of email exchanges between myself and the clinical research team. These messages show me directing every aspect of the research development, with Patricia providing occasional feedback and administrative support. At no point does she contribute strategic direction or conceptual development. Dr. Torres leaned forward. "Elena, these are serious allegations. Are you suggesting that Dr. Kellerman has misrepresented her role in this research?" "I'm not suggesting anything, I'm documenting it." I clicked to my final piece of evidence, the computer logs showing Patricia's late-night access to my presentation files, combined with screenshots of the modifications she'd made. These logs show Patricia accessing my presentation files at 11 p.m. the night before our board meeting, followed by systematic alterations designed to make my research appear less significant and less successful. The room fell silent. Dr. Foster studied the computer logs, her expression shifting from corporate neutrality to genuine concern. Jennifer Walsh was frantically taking notes, while David Kumar had stopped writing entirely and was staring at Patricia. Patricia made one final attempt to control the narrative. Elena, I think you're letting emotions cloud your judgment about normal research oversight processes. The modifications you're describing were quality improvements designed to strengthen your presentation. Patricia, I said quietly, please explain why quality improvements would reduce our success rates, extend our timelines, and make our results appear less significant. And please explain why these improvements were made without my knowledge or consent, hours before a board presentation where you'd already arranged to present my work as your own. Dr. Foster closed the bound presentation Patricia had prepared. Dr. Kellerman, I think we need to suspend this meeting while we review these materials more thoroughly. Elena, please send all of your documentation to legal and HR for comprehensive analysis. Patricia tried one last manipulation. Amanda, I hope we can resolve this situation without damaging the important research relationships that have made this breakthrough possible. Elena's work has been exemplary, and I'd hate to see a misunderstanding about collaboration undermine her future at Meridian. But her tone had changed. The confident authority was gone, replaced by the careful language of someone who knew they'd been caught. Dr. Foster's expression made it clear that the misunderstanding wouldn't be blamed on me. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I was placed on administrative leave with full pay while legal and HR conducted interviews with everyone who'd worked on the prevention protocol research. The digital forensics team analyzed computer access logs, email metadata, and document revision histories. External investigators reviewed my research notebooks, timeline documentation, and the audio recordings I'd made of conversations with Patricia. The results were unambiguous. Patricia had systematically taken credit for research she hadn't conceived, designed, or executed. The computer evidence showed a pattern of her accessing my files, copying research materials, and modifying presentations without authorization. The interview transcripts revealed that every member of the research team considered me the project leader and primary developer of the prevention protocol. Most damaging of all, the investigation uncovered 2 previous instances where Patricia had claimed credit for research developed by junior colleagues. Dr. Sarah Williams revealed that Patricia had presented Sarah's metabolic research as her own at a major conference 3 years earlier. Dr. James Chen admitted that Patricia had been listed as primary author on 2 papers that were based entirely on his doctoral research. The resolution came in the form of a conference call with Dr. Foster, the board of directors, and Meridian's external legal counsel. Patricia had been terminated for research misconduct, violations of intellectual property policies, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her name would be removed from all my research publications, and she would be required to issue public corrections for any presentations where she'd claimed credit for work she hadn't developed. More importantly for my career, I was promoted to Chief Research Officer, Patricia's former position. The prevention protocol would proceed to FDA submission under my leadership, with my name as primary investigator and Meridian's full institutional support. The company also implemented new policies requiring digital signatures and timestamps for all research contributions, making future attribution disputes much more difficult. The day I moved into Patricia's former corner office, I found a handwritten note she'd left in the desk drawer. Elena, you were always more capable than you realized. I'm sorry I let ambition override integrity. The research world needs people like you, Patricia. It was the first genuine statement she'd made to me in months, and it came too late to change anything. The professional aftermath was both validating and sobering. Within 3 months, news of Patricia's research misconduct had spread through the biotech industry. She was quietly removed from editorial boards, her speaking engagements were canceled, and several of her previous publications came under review for potential attribution issues. The woman who had spent decades building an impressive reputation watched it crumble in a matter of weeks. For me, the transition to Chief Research Officer brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. And leading the department that Patricia had controlled for 12 years meant navigating relationships with colleagues who had witnessed our conflict and weren't sure which version of events to believe. Some researchers who had been loyal to Patricia viewed my promotion with skepticism, wondering whether I'd exaggerated the situation for career advancement. The FDA's submission process for the prevention protocol became a test of my leadership under scrutiny. Every decision I made was evaluated by people watching to see whether I could successfully manage research that I'd developed under controversial circumstances. The pressure was enormous, but the work spoke for itself. Our clinical trial data was solid, our methodology was rigorous, and our results exceeded even my own optimistic projections. 6 months after Patricia's termination, the FDA granted fast-track designation for our early-onset Alzheimer's prevention protocol. The designation meant accelerated review timelines and priority access to regulatory resources. More importantly, it meant that thousands of families at risk for early-onset Alzheimer's would have access to potentially life-saving treatment years earlier than anticipated. The industry recognition that followed was gratifying but complicated. I was invited to speak at conferences where Patricia had been a featured presenter for years. Researchers who had collaborated with her for decades wanted to understand how someone with her reputation could have engaged in such systematic misconduct. The conversations were difficult but necessary, forcing our field to examine how mentorship relationships could be exploited and how institutional power could be misused. The personal healing took longer than the professional recovery. 21 years of mentorship and friendship don't disappear overnight, even when that relationship was built on lies. I found myself questioning other professional relationships, wondering whether colleagues' supportive words reflected genuine collaboration or hidden agendas. Trust, once broken so completely, was difficult to rebuild even with people who had no connection to Patricia's betrayal. Therapy helped, particularly working with Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, who specialized in workplace trauma and professional relationship abuse. She helped me understand that Patricia's behavior represented a pattern of psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple career ambition. The systematic way Patricia had built my trust, isolated me from other mentors, and then exploited that dependence reflected techniques commonly used by abusers in personal relationships. One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was learning to trust my own professional judgment again. Patricia had spent years positioning herself as the authority on strategic thinking, research direction, and career development. Without her constant guidance, I had to relearn confidence in my own decision-making abilities. The imposter syndrome was overwhelming at first. Every choice I made as chief research officer felt like a guess rather than an informed decision. The breakthrough came during a budget planning meeting where I was presenting resource allocation recommendations for the upcoming fiscal year. One of the board members questioned my decision to increase funding for early-stage research while reducing administrative overhead. Instead of immediately deferring to external authority, I realized I could explain my reasoning with confidence and specificity. I knew our research better than anyone else in the room. My recommendations were based on data, experience, and strategic thinking that I'd developed independently. I didn't need Patricia's validation to know that my decisions were sound. The impact on my team's dynamics was equally significant. Researchers who had worked under Patricia's hierarchical management style needed time to adapt to my more collaborative approach. I instituted weekly team meetings where junior researchers could present their work directly to the group rather than filtering everything through senior oversight. I created project ownership structures that gave individual researchers credit for their contributions while maintaining overall coordination. Most importantly, I implemented transparency measures that would prevent the kind of attribution theft that Patricia had practiced. Every research development session was recorded and archived. Contribution logs were maintained for all projects with digital signatures and timestamps that couldn't be altered. Team members received copies of all presentations and publications where their work was featured, ensuring they could document their involvement independently. The industry response to these changes was overwhelmingly positive. Junior researchers began requesting transfers to our department because they knew their work would be properly attributed and their career development would be genuine rather than exploitative. Senior researchers wanted to collaborate with a team that had institutional policies protecting intellectual property and encouraging innovation. 18 months after becoming Chief Research Officer, I received a letter from Dr. Jennifer Park, a postdoctoral researcher who had worked under Patricia 5 years earlier. Jennifer thanked me for speaking publicly about research attribution issues and credited my advocacy with giving her the courage to challenge a similar situation at her current institution. Her letter described how watching Patricia's downfall had shown her that even established researchers could be held accountable for misconduct, and that junior colleagues didn't have to accept exploitation as the price of career advancement. That letter crystallized something I'd been struggling to understand about the broader implications of my experience. Patricia's betrayal hadn't just been a personal attack on my career, it had been part of a systemic problem in academic research where power imbalances enabled exploitation and misconduct. By fighting back, documenting the abuse, and insisting on accountability, I'd contributed to changing the culture that allowed such behavior to flourish. The prevention protocol received full FDA approval 26 months after Patricia's termination. The announcement was covered by major media outlets as a breakthrough in Alzheimer's treatment, with particular emphasis on the potential to prevent cognitive decline in patients who carried genetic markers for early-onset disease. The coverage consistently identified me as the primary researcher and Meridian as the supporting institution. On the day the approval was announced, I received congratulatory messages from colleagues across the industry, including several researchers who had worked with Patricia over the years. Many of them privately shared stories of questionable attribution practices they'd witnessed but hadn't challenged. The conversation that emerged from Patricia's downfall had created space for other researchers to discuss similar experiences and advocate for better institutional protections. The most meaningful recognition came from the patients and families who would benefit from our research. I received dozens of letters from people whose genetic testing had identified them as candidates for the prevention protocol. Their gratitude was profound and humbling. These were people whose lives would be fundamentally different because research I'd conceived during a Saturday morning brainstorming session would allow them to prevent a disease that had devastated their families for generations. But perhaps the most important outcome was the mentorship program I developed for junior researchers. Having experienced both genuine mentorship and exploitative manipulation, I was uniquely positioned to help young scientists navigate professional relationships safely. The program included training on recognizing manipulation tactics, documentation requirements for collaborative work, and institutional resources for reporting misconduct. The first group of mentees included 8 researchers from across different departments, ranging from postdoctoral fellows to assistant professors. Our monthly meetings covered not just scientific development but career strategy, professional boundary setting, and advocacy skills. I taught them the documentation habits that had saved my career, keeping detailed records of idea development, maintaining independent backup copies of their work, and building relationships with multiple mentors rather than depending on single authority figures. 2 years into the program, 3 of my mentees had been promoted to leadership positions within their departments. More importantly, none of them had experienced the kind of exploitation that had defined my relationship with Patricia. They'd learned to recognize red flags early, document their contributions proactively, and advocate for themselves effectively when situations became problematic. The transformation in my own leadership style was equally significant. Where Patricia had cultivated dependence and isolation, I encouraged independence and collaboration. Where she had hoarded information and opportunities, I shared resources and created pathways for others. Where she had used her position to extract credit from others' work, I used mine to amplify the contributions of researchers who might otherwise be overlooked. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's betrayal had ultimately made me a better leader and researcher than I would have been under her continued mentorship. Her exploitation had forced me to develop skills and confidence that might have taken years to acquire through normal professional development. The crisis had revealed capabilities I didn't know I possessed and values I hadn't been required to defend. Looking back on the experience 3 years later, I can see how Patricia's systematic manipulation had been designed to keep me dependent on her guidance while positioning her to claim credit for my achievements. The betrayal was devastating, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my adult career, I was operating without the weight of someone else's expectations and agenda. The research continues to flourish under independent leadership. Our department has published 12 papers in the past year, with clear attribution and collaborative authorship that reflects actual contributions. The prevention protocol has been licensed to pharmaceutical companies around the world, generating revenue that Meridian has reinvested in expanding our research capabilities. Most importantly, early clinical results suggest that we're achieving the prevention outcomes we'd hoped for when I first conceived the research. The professional relationships I've built since Patricia's departure are fundamentally different from anything I experienced under her mentorship. They're based on mutual respect, transparent communication, and genuine collaboration rather than power dynamics and hidden agendas. Colleagues treat me as an equal contributor to discussions rather than a junior participant who needs approval for independent thinking. The speaking engagements and conference presentations that follow from our research success have given me a platform to advocate for better attribution practices and mentorship accountability across the biotech industry. I've testified before university committees reviewing research misconduct policies, consulted with companies developing intellectual property protections, and advised government agencies on preventing exploitation in publicly funded research. But the most rewarding aspect of my current position is the opportunity to model the kind of leadership I wished I'd experienced earlier in my career. Young researchers in my department know that their ideas will be credited appropriately, their career development will be prioritized alongside research goals, and their professional relationships will be based on respect rather than exploitation. The culture we've created attracts talented people who want to work in an environment where excellence is encouraged rather than stolen. The lessons I learned from Patricia's betrayal have applications far beyond academic research. In any field where junior professionals depend on senior mentors for career development, there's potential for exploitation when power imbalances aren't properly monitored. The warning signs are consistent: mentors who isolate mentees from other relationships, who claim credit for collaborative work, who use emotional manipulation to maintain control, and who punish independence or questioning. My advice to anyone facing similar situations is straightforward. Document everything, maintain multiple professional relationships, trust your instincts about exploitation, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself even when the stakes seem overwhelming. The institutional protections for junior professionals are stronger than they used to be, but they only work when people are willing to use them. The most important thing I learned is that integrity and career success aren't mutually exclusive. When I chose to fight Patricia's theft rather than accept it quietly, I was risking everything I'd built under her mentorship. But the alternative, allowing my life's work to be stolen by someone who had betrayed my trust, would have been a different kind of career death. By insisting on truth and accountability, I didn't just save my research, I discovered the kind of leader I wanted to become. If you've experienced workplace betrayal, especially from someone in a position of authority over your career, please know that you're not alone and that speaking up is possible. The system isn't perfect, but it's more responsive to documentation and advocacy than many people realize. Your work belongs to you, your ideas deserve proper credit, and your career shouldn't be dependent on someone else's integrity. The biotech industry is better today because Patricia Kellerman's misconduct was exposed and addressed. Research attribution practices are more transparent, mentorship relationships are better monitored, and junior researchers have stronger protections against exploitation. Those changes happened because people were willing to document problems, report misconduct, and insist on accountability even when it was personally risky. I hope my experience encourages others to document their contributions, advocate for proper attribution, and resist exploitation even when it comes from trusted mentors. The short-term risks of challenging authority are significant, but the long-term benefits of protecting your work and integrity are immeasurable. Your career belongs to you, and you have the right to defend it. If you're currently facing a situation where your work is being misattributed or your contributions are being minimized, start documenting everything immediately. Keep copies of your communications, maintain independent records of your idea development, and build relationships with multiple mentors and colleagues who can verify your contributions. The evidence you gather today might be the foundation for protecting your career tomorrow. Thank you for watching this story, and please share your own experiences in the comments. The more we talk openly about workplace exploitation and professional betrayal, the better we can protect each other from the kind of systematic manipulation that I experienced under Patricia's mentorship. Together, we can build professional environments where excellence is rewarded rather than stolen, and where mentorship means empowerment rather than exploitation. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about workplace justice and professional advocacy. Your career matters, your work deserves proper credit, and your integrity is worth fighting for.